Good morning, everyone. This is Shivani, your hall coordinator. Welcome to 79th All India Ophthalmological Conference 2021. And I would request our chairperson and moderators to please switch on their camera, unmute the mic, and I would request our first speaker, Dr. Aditi Ghosh, to please start screen sharing. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shivani. Welcome all to our instruction course on chemical injury, Dousing the Fire, a 360-degree approach to chemical injury management. So we all know that chemical injury is an ocular emergency, and if not treated promptly and properly, leads to visual loss and a string of ocular sequelae leading to morbidity. It gives me immense pleasure to give an instruction course with all the wonderful speakers trying to incorporate all the aspects of the management of chemical injury, starting from acute to chronic, from restoration to rehabilitation. I now welcome Dr. Abhishek Dave sir to give our first talk as a frontline warrior, introduction and medical management. He's an Shankar Netralaya alum. Previously, he was cornea consultant in Shroff Charity Hospital, New Delhi, and presently he's a senior cornea consultant at Center for Sight, New Delhi. Welcome, Abhishek sir.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Aditi and AIOC for bringing up this important instruction course on chemical injury. And so, just a minute, the slides are not moving. Am I audible?
Yes, sir.
So you're audible.
Okay, right. Sorry for the delay. Thank you, Dr. Aditi and AIOC for bringing up this important instruction course. So what I would be covering is chemical injury, the diagnosis, classification, and the medical management. I am Dr. Abhishek Dave. So there are very few ophthalmic emergencies, and ocular chemical injury is one of the true ophthalmic emergencies because it can cause extensive damage to the ocular surface epithelium, the cornea, and the anterior segment. It is a potential for visual impairment and also a threat to the structural integrity of the eye. So what are the common agents which are causing this chemical injury? Alkali are the most common and the most dreaded agents. These are lipophilic. They penetrate the tissues more rapidly than acids. They saponify the fatty acids of cell membranes, penetrate the corneal stroma, and destroy the proteoglycan ground substance and collagen. The damaged tissue also secrete proteolytic enzymes, and thus it's a vicious cycle which keeps causing the destruction to happen unless the offending agent is removed. The acids are generally less harmful and less common than alkalis, though they are they can be equally harmful to the ocular surface. They denature and precipitates the protein in the tissue. The coagulated protein acts as a barrier to prevent further penetration. An exception would be hydrofluoric acid, which is very rapidly penetrating. So what are the common agents which are causing these alkali and acid injuries? So we'll be covering a few which are more common. These would be sulfuric acid, which we commonly see with patients coming, car mechanics coming in after a battery blast, and you would see sulfuric acid injuries. Another common one would be hydrochloric acid because that is used as a toilet cleaner in many of the homes. So children and adults also come with HCl being splashed into the eye. Another common one, which is very, very common in our Indian population, could be calcium hydroxide or lime. The common reasons would be an injury with cement, plaster, or whitewash agents. But also what is very common and specific to Indian population is Also very common would be tuna injury, and you would see many people eating tobacco who mix tuna in their tobacco, and children would be playing with these gooey tubes, and they open up and injure the eyes. So very common and a very dreaded agent. So basic pathophysiology would be a necrosis of the corneal and the conjunctival epithelium, a disruption and occlusion of the limbal vasculature. Also, a loss of limbal stem cells is seen, leading to conjunctivalization and vascularization of the cornea. Loss of epithelium causes PEDs and sterile corneal ulcers. So the diagnosis is mainly based on history, and there would be 4 important points in history which have to be asked. When the injury occurred, whether the patient rinsed the eyes afterwards and for how long, the type of chemical that splashed the eye to make out whether it was an acid or alkali, and the mechanism injury, whether the chemical was under a high pressure, to know whether there could be a damage to the ports of the eye as well. So before coming to the classification or the examination, first step which is to be done in a chemical injury patient is to wash the eye. So once the patient comes up into your OPD, the first thing which you have to do is to irrigate the ocular surface before making the patient sit on the slit lamp. So immediate copious irrigation with any agent, whether it be BSS, normal saline, or ringalactate. In fact, there have been various studies comparing these agents, but ultimately the consensus is washing is important, the agent is not so important. In fact, if the person is at home, even tap water is good enough to wash the eye for at least half an hour with about 2 to 3 liters of these solutions. You can also instill anesthetic eye drops so that the patient cooperates more for the wash. Always avert the upper eyelid and pull the lower fornix down to wash the chemical agents off from these fornices as well. Then coming to the evaluation, once the pH is below is in the range of 7 to 7.2, you will start the examination. If the pH is still less than 7 or more than 7.2, which you can check with simple pH strips, which you can keep in your OPD. If the pH is below or more, you have to still irrigate before coming on to the examination. So the aim of examination would be to see the extent and the depth of injury. So you see that with the involvement of the cornea, conjunctiva, and limbus. We'll be coming to that, how to see that. Do a fluorescent staining of the ocular surface to see the amount of epithelial damage. Fornices should always be checked with double eversion of the upper lid for any particulate matter which could be still there, and also to evaluate the amount of epithelial damage in the fornices also. Always check the IOP, especially if the patient is coming after a few days, because alkali injuries are known to cause raise of IOP. So you can do that digitally if the epithelium is damaged and you can't do an applanation digitally. Coming to the classification system, one of the first system which was introduced was Roper Hall classification system in early 1960s. It was based on 2 things, where on the basis of corneal clarity and on the basis of limbal ischemia. So whether the cornea was hazy, whether the iris could be seen, or there was a total haziness, the grades were divided into 1 to 4. And also if there was no limbal ischemia or less than 1/3 to half, and greater than half, these eyes were divided into 4 grades. But there were several shortcomings to the Roper Hall classification system. First of all, they were very broad categories. So a grade 4 burn would include anything from 50 to 100% of limbal ischemia. So now with good stem cell transplantation, we know that even if there is 1 to 2 clot of limbus available, the prognosis is favorable as compared to a total limbal ischemia. They had given a lot of importance to corneal haze, but now we know that rapid changes in corneal clarity are known to occur over days, and that is not a very reliable sign. Also, in eyes with total limbal ischemia, total limbal loss of epithelium as well as a corneal epithelial loss, the presence of any survival conjunctival epithelium is a favorable prognostic indicator, because even if the conjunctival epithelium grows onto the cornea, it's better than no epithelium at all. Also, limbal ischemia may not always be associated with limbal stem cell loss, because ischemia may be transient and it may become better over 2 to 3 days of medical therapy. Also, classification system should be more dynamic. So thus came the Duas classification, which was a much shorter category. So there were 6 categories which were made. And also, rather than putting more stress on cornea, the stress was more on conjunctival involvement and the limbal involvement. So if there was a limbal involvement of less than 3 clock hours, it was put in grade 2, and 3 to 6, 6 to 9, 9 to 12, and up to 12 clock hours, like that. Grade 6 were divided. Also conjunctival epithelial involvement if less than 30%, or whether it was 30 to 50, 50 to 75, 75 to 100, or total conjunctival involvement. Important thing to note is while calculating the percentage of conjunctival involvement, only involvement of the bulbar conjunctiva and the fornical conjunctiva is important. You don't really put stress on tarsal conjunctiva. Even if it's intact, it doesn't have much importance. So how do you calculate the amount of conjunctival epithelial involvement? The bulbar conjunctiva is divided into 4 parts of 1/6 each, and the fornical into 1/6 each. So you total them up and come out with the percentage of conjunctival involvement. So these are some examples of grade 1 to 6 injuries. So this was a grade 1 injury. This was an acid splash into the eye. So though it looks a bit dreaded, there's a large epithelial defect, but if you see, the conjunctiva is quite healthy. There's no conjunctival epithelial defect. Even the limbal stem cells, if you can see, are quite healthy, though there's bogginess, chemosis of the conjunctiva. But this injury healed within a week's time only with lubricants and antibiotic drug. Now, this is a grade 3 injury. This was an alkali injury where you can see there's about a 3 to 6 clock hours of limbal involvement, limbal damage. So it comes into grade 3 injury thus. Though if you see, the corneal epithelium is quite healthy over this area, but that is not of much importance. Now this is a grade 6 injury, a Chuna injury, a child with Chuna injury. So there's a total epithelial suffering over the cornea as well as the conjunctiva and the fornices, as well as a limbal ischemia, which is almost about 100%. So this will have a much graver prognosis and needs a much more intensive management than the upper foot pictures. So the management principle is basically divided into whether you have mild injury or a moderate to severe injury. So we'll be coming to that. The aims of management would be promote epithelialization as early as possible. Any epithelium is okay, whether it's conjunctival epithelium or corneal epithelium. But as long as the cornea remains bare, it's a threat to the integrity of the eye. Reduction of inflammation, prevention of progressive corneal melt, and prevention of cicatricial complication. So to start with, broad spectrum antibiotics, they are only given as a prophylaxis for epithelial defect. So don't put too toxic antibiotics and too frequently. So 3 to 4 times chloramphenicol or a moxifloxacin would suffice if it's a clean injury. But if it's an unclean injury, there's a lot of debris, lot of muck lying over the cornea, you can give fortified antibiotics also. Coming to the next category would be preservative-free lubricants. So frequent installation of CMC or HPMC to promote reepithelialization. I'll just take 2 minutes. So topical corticosteroids are the mainstay of medical treatment, and they have to be given more frequently, 1 to 2 hourly, in grade 3 to 6 injuries. They suppress the inflammation and inhibit collagenases, and thus promotes epithelial healing. They should be tapered off quickly because prolonged use can suppress in production and keratocyte migration, thus leading to stromal necrosis. Coming to sodium ascorbate, any injury to ciliary body by chemical causes a drop in aqueous ascorbate level. Thus, a 10% topical drop, which is more potent than oral supplementation, is recommended in all grade 3 to 6 chemical injuries. So orally, also important thing to remember is that you have to give 2 tablets 4 times in a day, not just 1 or 2 tablets in a day. So 1000 milligram 4 times in a day. An injection you can get as a 500 milligram ampule. You dilute it 1:5 time to get a 10% solution. Sodium citrate is also important to reduce the ocular surface inflammation, and it also inhibits the collagenases. A 10% topical solution, which can be made by diluting 1:4 these injection, which is available, which is about 47%.
I'm sorry, sir. I'm sorry to interrupt, but can we sum it up in next 30 seconds?
Yeah. Just 2 more slides.
Thank you, sir.
So coming to topical biological fluids like autologous serum, which is more commonly and readily available. So 20 to 50% can be used. The rare ones would be umbilical cord serum, autologous platelet-rich plasma. Again, they have been shown in many studies to be more potent then also amniotic membrane transplant, or even as efficacious, but the availability is not so easy. Other experimental agents I would rather skip, and IOP lowering agent should be used whenever needed. Oral doxycycline again should be started because it promotes epithelial healing and it retards any corneal ulcer. So the take-home points would be ocular chemical injury is a sight-threatening emergency. The management should start even before detailed examination. Patient should be assessed daily in cases of severe injury, and topical steroid and lubricants till date would form the mainstay of treatment until we come up with something more promising in larger randomized controlled trials. Thank you so much for your kind attention, and sorry for exceeding the time limit.
Thank you so much, Abhishek sir, for wrapping it up so beautifully. I would now welcome Dr. Bhaskar A. Chaudhary sir. He's a senior consultant in AMRI at Kolkata and has made ocular surface surgeons' life easy with his new innovation of Amcerta. Over to you, sir. So your slides are visible.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Perfect. We can start your slideshow.
Thank you, Aditi, for having me in this session. And that was an excellent presentation by Dr. Abhishek. So I'll be talking about a simple device which I have invented, which will shorten the pain of amniotic membrane transplantation in the acute setting for both the patient and the doctor. So we know that the human amniotic membrane has been used for quite some time on the ocular surface in the acute setting as well as for SLAT and other chronic settings. So we are interested only in the basement membrane part of the amniotic membrane because we know that it has got anti-scarring property and anti-inflammatory property. The amniotic membrane has been used extensively in the reconstruction of the ocular surface in conjunction with stem cell transplantation and as a conjunctival substitute following removal of pterygia, conjunctival lesions, and symblepharon release, etc. The most important use of amniotic membrane where it really makes a difference is acute chemical burns, which we are discussing, and acute Stevens-Johnson syndrome also. So as Abhishek has already touched upon this, I will not dwell on this, but the importance of amniotic membrane transplantation are in grade 4, 5, and 6 of Dua's classification for acute injuries, and in acute SJS, we follow Gregory's grading, in which the severe and extremely severe, that is more than 1/3 lid margin involvement with any epithelial defect more than a PE on the cornea, and a stain positive of greater than 1 centimeter on the palpebral or bulbar conjunctiva is considered to be severe or extreme. And in that case, we follow this algorithm where in the severe and the very severe category, amniotic membrane transplantation is life-saving for the patient. The conventional process of amniotic membrane, which is being shown in acute Stevens-Johnson syndrome in this case, suffers from certain issues. And these issues are that it is extremely painful for the patient because often the patient is in the ICU setting and very little can be done by way of anesthesia. And it is a laborious process for the surgeon who has to do it without the help of the microscope. So several people have tried to come up with different devices. Procera is one such device. And here you can see Procera, but the problem of Procera is, other than being expensive and not readily available in our country, this covers only about 2 millimeters beyond the limbus. So the main problem in chemical injuries and SJS lies in the fornices and the bulbar and lid conjunctiva. So those are not addressed. So one team from Massachusetts, I have tried to use infant feeding tube, which is tucked into itself to form a variable sized ring, and then the amniotic membrane is draped on the eye and the ring is tucked in so that the AM goes inside. But the problem of this is that when you are laying the amniotic membrane on the eye, it becomes unsterile and the tube tends to come out. So we felt that there was an unmet need in this area, and we needed a device which could be assembled in the eye bank or OT at the bedside, stored like a regular AM under topical anesthesia and used at the bedside. So we went through certain design iterations, and finally we ended up with having it being manufactured from Aurolab. And this is the milling process. It's simple. It is made out of PMMA and can be manufactured easily. So this is the final avatar that is being marketed now by Aurolab. I have no financial interest in this, and it comes in two parts: a bottom part and a top part, and they are separately packed in ETO packages. So now what you can see on the left side of your screen is the bottom part is laid down. There is a notch over here onto which the top part goes. I am showing a dry assembly first. So the top part will simply go and snap fit into the device. Now to attach the amniotic membrane to this device, over here what is being shown is that the device is fairly compressible. So we have it in one size only, and it has been seen that because of this compressibility, it fits into fornices of different sizes. So to attach the amniotic membrane, you tuck the device under the amniotic membrane, the bottom part, and then simply bring the top ring, and it snaps in, and it becomes one assembly which can be used with the hand or with a forceps and directly inserted into the eye like a contact lens. There is an alternative technique in which you put the bottom part on top of the amniotic membrane and bunch the amniotic membrane internally and then seal the top part. The advantage of this technique is the edge of the lower part which goes into the fornix is also covered by amniotic membrane. So this is a case in which of chemical injury which was done by Dr. Rishi, who will be presenting later, and it just shows that you can do amniotic membrane transplantation in a matter of minutes, even in the acute setting. This is another case in which the amniotic membrane is being done in the PICU for a Stevens-Johnson syndrome child. And you can see that this is being assembled on the gloved hand of the surgeon. Although ideally it should be done under the microscope in the OT or away from the gloved hand to maintain sterility further. And you can see that over here, Dr. Bhupesh, who did the surgery, is pulling the excess amniotic membrane outside and also draping the lids. So it can be used like a conformer under topical, and you can also use the excess amount of amniotic membrane if you're using a large sheet to drape the lids, which is an important consideration, especially in Stevens-Johnson syndrome. So this is another case in which the Amcertor was used, and you can see it really makes a difference because it prevents synechia, symblepharon formation, and promotes epithelial healing. So really the eye gets saved, because we all know by now that amniotic membrane in the eye in the acute stage of chemical injuries or SJS really makes a difference for the patient. And you can prevent almost all the chronic sequelae if you have done an amniotic membrane within the first 48 hours. So here are some more cases of use from across India. And this was a case of Chuna injury, which is, as Abhishek said, is very common in our country. And these are the results. So it really goes a long way in preventing symblepharon and promoting epithelial healing. So this is another case in which it was used in a chemical injury with a large corneal defect. So what are the advantages of the Amcertor? The elliptical design helps conform to the shape of the fornices, and it is deformable yet with good memory, so it does not tend to come out and it's not brittle. So while you are inserting it, there are no cases reported till date in which the amsiter has broken. You can actually use more than one layer. So we have tried with attaching, and it works with up to 3 layers. Beyond that, the snap-in effect is not so good. And if you want, you can apply glue on the undersurface and put it in, but it is not really required, because there is no chance, unless the patient is pressing on the lower lid vigorously, that the amsiter will come out. But if you want to disinsert it, it is fairly easy by putting a speculum and holding the lateral edge with a forceps and nudging it out. So here is a little bit of a testimonial from Dr. James of Mass Eye.
It's not audible.
Okay, then I'll skip this slide.
Okay.
Okay, so the saga of the amsiter does not end here with the invention. It actually starts here, because we have to educate the critical care specialists and dermatologists to refer acute Steven Johnson cases to us. And for our colleagues who are treating chemical injuries, they also have to be made aware of this device. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir, for the
And I
wonderful
finished on time.
presentation. Yes, thank you so much. So, you can stop screen sharing. Will I start? Thank you so much for the wonderful presentation. So next, I'll be speaking about tenonplasty. I'm Dr. Aditi Ghosh. Previously, I was associated with Shankar Nethralaya, Kolkata, and presently I'm practicing in New Delhi in Batra Hospital and Kolkata Nethralaya. So tenonplasty, the unsung savior in chemical injury, it is a well-established technique for repair and initial stabilization of globe integrity in chemical injury. What it does is just covers the sclera with a healthy vascularized tissue from the depth of the orbit, that is the tenon. The aim is to reconstruct the conjunctival matrix and surface and prevent further complications. So Abhishek sir has wonderfully covered the classification, so I'll not go into it. So Dua take care of the limbal involvement. Hall coordinator, could you please mute others? Dr. John, you are unmuted. So what is scleral ischemia? It is a complete absence of vascularization or scleral tissue associated with or without necrosis. What are the indications of tenonplasty? It is localized ischemia with Dr. John Sarkar. So what are the indications? It is localized ischemia with adjacent corneal melt or an overlying non-healing defect or generalized ischemia. So what is the aim? We re-establish the vascularity of an ischemic surface, help fast epithelialization, reduce the consequences of scleral ischemia, promote corneal epithelialization, prevent ulceration, reconstruct and the conjunctival matrix of the globe up to the lumbar. So a little bit about the anatomy. Ms. Shivani, could you please mute the others?
Yes, Dr. Aditi, I'm so sorry, but I don't have the rights. I would request Ramesh to please mute Dr. John. Okay, yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you
sorry
so
for
much.
The inconvenience. Yes.
No, it's okay. So a little bit about the anatomy. So it has two surfaces, an anterior surface and a posterior surface. Now the posterior surface is in contact with the orbital fat. Attachments, we should know that that is attached about 1.5 mm posterior to the sclerocorneal junction. So the surgical method I'll cover in the video, but a little bit about it. The main aim is to remove the necrotic material. The conjunctival margins have to be freshened. We have to create a tenoconjunctival plane. The aim is to cover the bare sclera without tension, so we can give relaxing incisions. Then we cover the sclera with a vascular pedicle graft of the tenon from the depth of the orbit. We can secure it with fibrin glue and also with a Vicryl 80 suture at the limbus so that it does not retract back. The remnant conjunctiva is secured over the tenon flap. Sometimes there are a lot of necrotic conjunctiva, so amniotic membrane grafting comes to the aid in these cases and it covers the whole surface, followed by a bandage contact. So here's a small video showing the tenonplasty with amniotic membrane. So here you can see We have removed the necrotic tissue. We are creating a plane below the conjunctiva. So a tenoconjunctival plane creation is very important. We have to cut out the excess tissue. We have to pull it from the depth of the orbit without any tension. So in between, if you feel any contraction of the fornix, we can give relaxing incision. Then we can secure it with fibrin glue till the limbus. Also, I'd like to give sutures at the limbus with 80 Vicryl. Then we cover it with the conjunctival remnant flap, followed by amniotic membrane graft and a bandage contact lens with the bare side down of the amniotic membrane. So here are the results of this case. So preoperatively, you can see history of chemical injury in left eye 3 days back, 30-year-old male. This is 1 month post-op with an integrated amniotic membrane epithelialized surface with no retraction, and follow-up with a nebulous scar, but a UCVA of 6. So here's the second case. Of the same patient, the other eye, right eye, had a corneoscleral melt. So here we went ahead with a tenonplasty plus tectonic patch graft and amniotic membrane. So here you can see that we have used a corneal patch graft. So in melts also, tenonplasty is of great help as it helps in further retraction, exposure of the graft, and melting. So here is the result of this case. So here you can see the patient presented like this with in the right eye. And then here's the post-op photograph where the corneal patch graft was covered with a tenon patch at the scleral area, remnant conjunctiva, and amniotic membrane. At post-op 1 month, we can see integrated amniotic membrane, epithelialized surface, graft edema was there. This is the follow-up at 1 year. The patient is aware regarding secondary other surgeries in future, but he is happy with his BCVA at present. So here are a few early results of tenonplasty done in various grades of dwarf classification. So here in grade 2 of limbal involvement, grade 3, which I showed in the video, grade 4, where we can see here there's a pseudopterygium formation, but we can do with that. This is the second video that I showed with the corneal sclerocorneal melt, and here is the grade 6 where the patient did need a tectonic graft because on table it was a very thin cornea with a perforation. So there are complications. There can be tenon graft retraction leading to exposure. There can still be persistent epithelial defect. After graft retraction, there can be still exposure of the sclerocorneal area leading to melt. A few sequelae are granuloma formation, symbioform formation, corneal foreshortening. That is why I was stressing that we have to do it without any strain. We have to give relaxing sutures. It should be easily covering the paired sclera without any tension. Pseudopterygium formation, limbal stem cell deficiency, pseudoconjunctivalization even after that. So to conclude, tenonplasty provides a vascular pedicle for the residual conjunctival cells to migrate freely, accelerate reepithelialization. It improves the local microenvironment and microcirculation and is the first step to prevent sclerocorneal melt. So the take-home message, scleral ischemia, even though it's not involved in the classification, but it requires immediate intervention and attention. Early diagnosis is the key to avoid any low perforation. Patient and family counseling is of utmost importance because they have to be very clear that it will be a staged reconstruction, and the aim is first to anatomical integrity to help the globe survive, followed by visual rehabilitation. These are the references. Thank you so much for being a patient audience. I'll stop my screen share. So
Thank you, Dr. Aditi, for such an informative session.
Thank you so much. May I now welcome Dr. Sumana Chatterjee ma'am for the next talk. She's a senior cornea consultant in BBI Hospital and Netralayam, Kolkata. She's a managing director of Sunayan Advanced Eye Institute at Tamluk, West Bengal. Over to you, Sumana ma'am.
Thank you, Aditi. Can you see my screen?
No. I've stopped sharing.
Yeah.
You
Can you see now?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I request all the other speakers to mute themselves.
Yeah. Is it visible properly?
Yes, ma'am. Perfect. Please go on.
Okay. So at the outset, I do like to thank Aditi so much for including me in this awesome instruction course, very practical one. So my topic of discussion is to do or not to do SLET in acute chemical injury. So let's first define how acute is acute. We actually cannot limit it by specific time frame. It depends on different signs, most important being inflammation, ischemia, and epithelial defect, or the presentation within 1 month of injury, or non-healing persistent epithelial defect with maximum medical or surgical intervention, including amniotic membrane transplantation. We consider them as acute. So what matters most? The appropriate window of opportunity in the acute stage of the disease, which actually determines the course of the outcome. What a persistence of epithelial defect in acute chemical injury can result. It prevents the possible survival of residual limbal stem cells due to inflammation, augments the risk of stromal melt and scarring, and an infection involving especially the central cornea. So what does amniotic membrane do? It facilitates epithelialization by acting as a basement membrane, providing epitheliotropic and anti-inflammatory factors in eyes with adequate residual cells. So in eyes with severe chemical injury, with a paucity of residual cells, amniotic membrane cannot provide result by itself. So the membrane requires to be provided with an external cell source to populate the amniotic membrane. Autologous limbal stem cells are not routinely indicated in the acute stage due to the high risk of failure. So the external cell source can either be comet, that is the oral mucosal epithelium, or clet, that is cultivated limbal epithelium. But both of them needs lab and some precious time that we actually cannot lose in such scenarios. So we go for allogenic limbal stem cells. This alloslet is performed in eyes with severe chemical injury, grade 5 and 6 DUA classification, or grade 4 Roper Hall classification, as already mentioned by the previous speakers, and in lesser grade injuries if there is non-healing epithelial defect. So alloslet is performed using the fresh cadaveric limbal cells. We take it within 24 to 70 hours of 72 hours of harvesting to hasten the epithelialization. Larger amount of cells can be harvested from the cadaveric donor, that is for almost 4 to 6 clock hours. Limbal tissue is placed on a relatively avascular bed, that is in the mid-peripheral cornea, thus decreasing the immunogenicity. And primary aim is rapid epithelialization and not long-term survival of allo cells. So systemic immunosuppression is not actually required. The advantages being resolution of inflammation, faster epithelialization, lesser occurrence of more severe grades of symblepharon, lesser need for tectonic procedures or subsequent optical keratoplasty, as corneal clarity after alloslet is a striking feature. And in rare instances, lesser need for a subsequent limbal stem cell transplantation if adequate residual limbal stem cell transplants were, limbal stem cells, the adequate residual limbal stem cells were enabled to survive with the help of alloslet. So if we check the balance sheet, so we'll see in case of the alloslet performed along with AMT, there is statistically significant faster epithelialization, less occurrence of grade 4 symblepharon, and thus the repeat surgery to release symblepharon also less occurrence of leukomatous scarring, and incidence of total limbal stem cell deficiency was also low if compared with doing AMT alone. The striking feature is the retaining corneal clarity with a corneal epithelial phenotype. This is very important. What we get in alloslet, it aids in this improvement of visual acuity by faster epithelialization and also less scarring. So if not done in the first time, the decision to perform an alloslet as a subsequent procedure should preferably be taken if the primary amniotic membrane transplant fails. Visual rehab can therefore be quicker, and in pediatric patient, the risk of amblyopia can be reduced. So I will share the story of a 9-year-old boy. He came to me with a chemical injury with scleral ischemia and epithelial defect. So I performed tenonplasty along with alloslat for him. And later on, as he had significant cataract, we did phacoemulsification with IL implantation and RGPCL trial for him. And he became 6'9" in age from hand movement in 6 months' time. That is awesome, I think. So is there any provision for re-alloslat? The slat beads, they might get dislodged in these inflamed eyes in the post-operative period, and then the procedure may need to be repeated more than once. So a tarsorrhaphy is always placed at the end of the procedure to prevent inadvertent loss of BCL and subsequent mechanical dislodgement of the slat beads. So when to plan the next auto slat? With subsidence of ocular inflammation over 4 to 6 months following the chemical injury, and at the time of noticing early signs of alloslat failure in the form of conjunctivalization encroaching into the cornea with minimal haze. So the pertinent points being alloslat functions as a stopgap measure till an autoslat is performed if required. Cadaveric limbal tissue provides cells that are of corneal phenotype. This is very important, better than a conjunctivalization. And we have to choose fresh cadaveric tissue to ensure viability of the stem cells. So the usual queries are whether the alloantigenic load hampered the outcome of subsequent autoslat. See, the alloantigenic load is of concern in fear of rejection. And as we are performing an autoslat, the concept of rejection doesn't occur. Still, small bits of allolimbal tissue only we place on avascular cornea away from limbus. And while doing the autoslat, these allocells also will be peeled off along with the pallus. The next common query is how allocells survive in the adverse environment of chemical injury. Because we are putting larger amount of cells, almost 4 to 6 clock hours in comparison to autoslat, along with the application of topical steroids and amniotic membrane transplantation, which controls the inflammation, allowing the cells to grow. So the take-home message being, alloslat by facilitating rapid epithelialization in the acute stage reduces inflammation earlier, thus reducing chances of symblepharon and corneal scarring. The number of surgeries required for surface reconstruction is reduced, and thus the outcome of autoslat is actually improved. I acknowledge my teachers and the pioneers in this field of alloslat from Shankara Netralaya, and thank you for your patient hearing. So I'll stop share now.
Thank you so much, Sumana ma'am, for that enlightening talk. There are so many doubts regarding alloslat, and you have answered each and every one of them so beautifully. Thank you so much. May I now request Dr. Rishi Swarup sir to present his talk. He's a well-known face in cornea, ocular surface and refractive surgery, managing director of Swarup Eye Center, Hyderabad. Over to you, Rishi sir.
Thank you, Aditi. This is a fabulous course, and I'm sure all the attendees are learning a lot. I think we are a little ahead of time, so can I take 2 minutes more? Because I have to cover many things.
Sure, sure.
Okay, thank you. So I'll just start my. Is my screen visible?
Sure.
All right. Okay, so the topic given to me is stem cell solutions for chronic sequelae of ocular burns. Now, whenever we're talking about the damage caused by chemical injury, it is by one of these 5 mechanisms. One is that you have decreased tear production or delivery because of damage to the accessory lacrimal glands or their ductules, or the ductules of the main lacrimal gland. You have inflammation of the ocular surface, prolonged inflammation, which can cause damage by itself. You have conjunctivalization of the surface, which is really the main thing which happens in stem cell deficiency, which affects the vision because the conjunctiva grows onto the cornea. And you have, because of the loss of the stem cells, you don't have regeneration of corneal epitheliums, you have breakdowns, etc. secondary to that. And finally, you've got mechanical injury because of the lid abnormalities, lashes getting inturned, keratinization of the lid margins. So you have friction with the corneal epithelium, which can cause problems. And of course, recurrent epithelial breakdowns can result in stromal melts, which can cause a lot of problems. So when we talk about limbal stem cell deficiency because of chemical injuries, it can be unilateral or bilateral. It can be partial or complete, and it can be a dry and wet, and it can be several combinations of these. So this is a pictorial representation of a moist versus a dry limbal stem cell deficiency. Now in the picture on the left, you have the entire cornea is conjunctivalized, you've got symblephra, but there are tears. Okay, so this kind of eye is one that will respond to stem cell therapies, which is what I'm going to be covering. The eye on the right is a dry, absolutely bone dry eye, along with, of course, stem cell deficiency and this keratinization of the surface. So this eye, stem cell solutions are of no use. You have to do something else like a keratoplastosis. So we all know that the stem cell resides in the basal epithelium of the palisades of Vogt, and they go through several stages: transient amplifying cells, post-mitotic cells, and terminal differentiated cells before becoming the final epithelium. And they go from the periphery to the center by means of the XYZ hypothesis, which we all know about. Now, where can one get stem cells when we want to do a transplant? Okay, you can get it from the same eye, which is called an ipsilateral autograft. You can get it from the fellow eye, which is a contralateral autograft. You can take it from a live-related donor, which is called a live-related allograft. You can get it from a cadaveric donor, which is a cadaveric allograft. Or if you don't have an eye source, then you can take it from the oral mucosa, and that is not exactly ocular stem cells, but you have oral mucosal stem cells, which then transdifferentiate into the ocular surface epithelium, which is called a cultivated oral mucosal epithelial transplantation, or COMET. Same thing, which is shown in this slide as well, so well on it. So one entity is bilateral limbal stem cell deficiency, like is shown in this picture. There's a partial limbal stem cell deficiency in both eyes. So one could, if there is a source in the same eye, you could take an ipsilateral limbus from the same eye. But if it is completely involving, then you have to go to a live-related allograft, or a cadaveric keratolimbal allograft, or a COMET, which is from the mouth. And now we have the option of doing a cadaveric or a live-related SLET, which I think has really eliminated the other options to a large extent. And if it is a bilateral partial this thing, then you could take stem cells from the same eye, cultivated them in the lab so that you have enough amount of epithelial cells, and then transplant it back onto the same eye, which is called an ipsilateral cleft. So if you have a unilateral involvement and the other eye is pretty healthy, then basically you take the source of your stem cells is the fellow eye. You can either directly do a conjunctival limbal autograft, or you can take stem cells, grow them in the lab, and then put them into the fellow eye, which is called a CLET, cultivated limbal epithelial transplantation. Or you can do a SLET, which is the popular technique nowadays, in which you just take stem cells from the fellow eye, limbal palisades, and then put them all over the eye, as was shown in the previous presentation by Sumana. So we've already covered amniotic membrane graft. I won't go into this. Before we had these stem cell options, we used to do cultivated conjunctival limbal autografts or allografts. So basically, you take 2 or 3 cloacas from the superior and inferior opposite limbus, conjunctiva, and the limbal epithelium. And then you, after harvesting this, you go to the donor eye, remove the entire fibrovascular pannus, and then you just suture these conjunctival limbal grafts on the opposite sides. And from here, you would have the epithelial cells growing out and populating the entire eye. So this works very well, actually. But only problem is, from the donor eye, you're removing a lot of limbal epithelium, almost 4 to 6 cloacas, which can sometimes cause a problem. Okay. You can induce a limbal deficiency in the fellow eye, especially if they have some other event after that. So we covered all these things. I'll just show a few videos. So cultivated limbal epithelial transplantation was in vogue before we had SLET. Now, I think largely most people are not doing it. Anyway, this was something which only the institutions could do because you should have a lab where you can culture stem cells. So I'll just show one example of one of my patients. This was a 6-year-old boy who I managed when I was in LV Prasad. So had a Lyme injury. You can see total limbal stem cell deficiency in the left eye, along with a small patch of keratinization. But by and large, the eye was dry. And the other eye was completely healthy with intact limbal palisades. So we took a biopsy from the right eye, grew them in the lab, and then after 2 weeks, we did a clet in left eye. So this is how you do it. You take the limbal epithelium like so. Take a little strip of 2 to 3 clock hours, then transport it to the lab. In the lab, it is broken down into small bits over a slide, and then it is grown to form a monolayer of confluent limbal epithelial cells, which look like this, which grow out from the explants. And once that is ready, then you go take the patient back for surgery. So this is the eye so badly fibrosed that we couldn't put a speculum initially. So essentially, you're excising the entire fibrovascular panus. Once you have released the semblifera, you can put in a speculum, and then basically you have to peel the whole thing off at the right plane, leaving behind no fibrovascular tissue stuck on the ocular surface. So you have to get a bare sclera and cornea, like so. So in this particular case, we noted that there was a lot of thinning in the cornea, and the underlying cornea was quite scarred. Now, this is a 6-year-old boy. I wanted to visually rehabilitate him as fast as possible. So in this case, we decided to also do a deep lamellar keratoplasty. I just did a lamellar manual DALC in this particular case because it was a large limbus to limbus graft and I didn't want a perforation. So as you can see, we've done that. And after the cornea was sutured in place, we removed the epithelium, then we put glue and put the amniotic membrane graft, which had the monolayer of cultivated limbal epithelial cells on top, and spread it out on the ocular surface like so. So you can see over time, the eye, which was like this, became very clear, and the patient actually managed to come out and get good vision, and we managed to avoid the patient from getting significant amblyopia. SLET is the new kid on the block, in which basically you are taking a small explant of a small biopsy from the healthy eye. In this case, we are taking a very big biopsy, but usually 1 to 2 clock hours are enough. And then you basically go to the unhealthy eye, remove the entire panels like was shown in the other eye, in the other video. And then you take this limbal tissue and break it into small bits. In this case, we're doing it on a Teflon block, but you can also place it on the ocular surface and cut it with a scissor. And each of these bits is called an explant. So you spread it out all over the cornea, peripheral cornea. Avoid putting it right into the center because those explants can then affect your vision. And then you stick them down with fibrin glue. Once the glue has coagulated, then you can just put a bandage contact lens. So and these patients again do very beautifully and we get excellent results. So this is just to show when we don't have a source of SLET in the fellow eye, then nowadays we can do cadaveric alloslet. This was covered by Sumana. So I'll just quickly run through this. So again, because you have the whole cadaveric tissue, you have a lot of limbal tissue, so you can take lots of it. This particular case, because the fellow eye also didn't have a source, we did a cadaveric the cadaveric SLET. What I found is, unlike live related and cadaveric conjunctival limbal grafts or other limbal transplants where you need to do systemic immunosuppression, in cadaveric alloslets you can probably get away with topical immunosuppression and tacrolimus, and I managed to manage a few patients without giving systemic immunosuppression, and the grafts have managed to survive for a very long time. So this particular case, you can see from this, we came to the image on the right and got a very good outcome. And this is on the OCT, the explants and the epithelium which has grown out healthily from them. So this was another patient who had a bilateral partial limbal stem cell deficiency. And as you can see, we have done a ipsilateral SLET. So from the same eye, we have taken some limbal tissue and then kind of transplanted it back onto the rest of the same eye, and we got a good outcome. I'll just end with this little case, a 75-year-old patient who had presented to my clinic after 2 months of cataract surgery, and severe decreased vision, redness, watering in both eyes since 2 weeks. Patient was on steroids, antibiotics, and was very, very uncomfortable with intense burning after instilling drops. Immediately after instilling drops, patient complained of burning, and the drops were being instilled by the daughter-in-law. So this is what. Can I just take a couple of minutes more, Aditi? Yes. So this was the picture. You can see the right eye had this large epithelial defect on the cornea, and there was the whole surface was quite inflamed. And left eye again had a large PED, and there was diffuse conjunctival congestion with edema, etc. And there was a lot of SPKs in the remaining cornea and significant pigments in the endothelium. So my diagnosis was a possible diagnosis was a chemical injury, a Munchausen syndrome by proxy, which means that somebody was contaminating her eye drops, and that's how she was getting this. Or there was a drop, some sort of a drug toxicity. The drop itself was not proper, or maybe a neurotrophic keratopathy with some sort of a mucus fishing syndrome. I forgot to mention the patient also had an inferior conjunctival epithelial defect. So we stopped all drops, just gave preservative-free lubricants, and the right eye epithelial defect started contracting, but the left eye remained the same. So we did temporary tarsorrhaphy, and you can see the right eye is much better, and left has a tarsorrhaphy in situ. So right eye, that epithelial defect didn't completely heal, so we put a BCL, and left eye we added an amniotic membrane graft. The right eye healed completely, the BCL is removed. Left eye, the amniotic membrane got integrated like this, and this is how it was. Right eye was quite good, clearing well, but left eye developed a scar with pannus. Now, by day 75, the right eye was again clearing a little bit, but left eye developed this kind of a severe pannus with a PED. So we repeated AMG and tarsorrhaphy. And again, so right eye was continuing to clear, left eye, the AMG got integrated with vascularization and was doing well. So this day 150, right eye cleared to about 2050, and left eye was severely edematous, along with total scarring and not scarring, but more of a superficial scarring with total limbus stem cell deficiency with tarsorrhaphy in situ. So we decided to do a SLET with a DSEC for the left eye because there was endothelial dysfunction as well. And my theory was the epithelium will not take if the endothelium is not healthy, because the epithelium will always be edematous. So we just did a, I mean, I won't go into the details. We basically did a DSEC like we routinely do, and took limbal biopsy from the fellow eye, dissected off the pannus, and put the explants on this eye. As you can see the DC tissue underneath, and you can see that this patient then eventually did quite well. By day 200, this was the picture, and by day 240, and finally by 1 year, the eye became fairly good, the cornea became compact, and the surface was fairly healthy. So that's about it. Just try to give you an overview of all the stem cell options for sequelae of chemical injury.
Thank you so much, Rishi sir. That's a huge topic. Beautiful cases, beautiful surgeries. Thank you so much. Thanks a lot. So may I now request Dr. John Sarkar. He was previously associated with Shankar Netralaya, Kolkata, presently senior cornea consultant and Shushruth Eye in Kolkata. Over to you, John sir.
Am I audible, Aditi?
Yes, sir. Yes.
Thank you very much, Aditi, for your kind words. I'm just sharing my screen.
So questions, we'll take up the panel discussion and the question answer after our last talk. That is with Dr. John sir. Over to you, sir. Yes, they are visible, so you can start.
My slides are visible?
Visible, visible. Please start.
Very good morning. Am I audible, Aditi? Hello. Am I audible?
You're audible. Your slides are visible. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Aditi, for your kind words. Thanks to all seniors. Very good morning to all of you. I'll be presenting under the broad headings of dousing the fire 360 approaches to the chemical injuries. I will highlight the visual rehabilitation and the beginners key to keratosis processes. Hope not prevails. I have no financial interest. I will highlight the following points: the special case scenarios in subacute and the late presentation, how we surgically manage all these cases, clinical evaluations, the rational surgical plan of each case, surgical tips and tricks, beginners key to care pros, discussion, and the take-home messages. How to do the visual rehabilitation in old chemical injury patients. We can do it improvement in the ocular surface health by giving the pros lens, cataract extraction when there's cataract lens, corneal transplantation, and the care pros. Cataract surgery often delayed or not attempted due to potential risks for surgery-related complications in those decompensated eye. And this presentation highlights appropriate management in scarred cornea. I would have the two options. Before going to the surgical compromised eye, we have two stem cell based treatment options. Among them, the congenital autograft ex vivo slates simple limbal epithelia transplantation, which is now come to the very much commonly practiced procedure, the keratolimbal allograft, alloslate, and the cultivated oral mucous epithelial transplantation. And overall, we can do the lamellar keratoplasty or PKs. And among the capros, we have and the modification like LBY capros. But before doing surgery, we should know the prerequisites for the compromised eyes. There should not be surface infection, moist eye, carotid tear film instability. IOP should be controlled. Sound posterior segment, appropriate available power calculation when planned for the cataract surgery or capros. A rational surgical plan with minimum tissue handling, and the team approach always rewarding. And whether I have the visual potential is there or not. Clinically, we should check the RFID. And if there is the people is normally reacting, there is no RFID, give you the hints that the patient having the functioning of the nerve. Antrocemal OCT is done to know the depth of the spur, thickness of the cornea under the panas. We mean to know the antrosegments and ciliary body status, and UVC scan is indicated to know the soundness of the posterior segment. I'm sharing a few cases. This is one of the cases. A 23-year female patient came to us with the complaining of the facility in the eye and with a mild ptosis, and for the marriage, and accompanied by her parents. And on clinically found that she having unilateral almost near total LSD, and she having this technical picture with almost vestigial LSD is there with the chronic edema, and there's a devascularization of that. What we planned for her, in spite of giving her the cosmetic contact lens, we simply do the we have done simply the one removal of the panas, and auto slit was done from other eye, as other eye was significantly normal. I'm just minimizing my video. My video is audible?
So we can see your video. Yeah, we can see your video.
Yeah. So we have removed. This is her on table. Actually, due to some technical issue, I have to be run the video separately. And simply, we are already my previous speakers shown the surgical management. What we have done this thing, we simply remove this panas, and it is surgically very much technically easy. Once you get the plane in between the panas and the cornea, just like your dull, you will get a very smooth to remove it off. And once it has been done, we put a AMT over the interval surface, fix it to the favorite globe. Take a slit from the other eye with prior consent from the patients. And fix it to the treatment room. Once it will be over, what has been done? We place a large vessel and the suture trachea has been done. So this is our 14 days post-op. If you recall the slide, so whatever I've shown the previously is almost vascularized eye. She came for the cosmetic correction, and it is a visual rehabilitation on the just day 14 of the post-op day. And on the over the 6 month, eye looks like this, and she having the 6/9 vision. Just only doing the simple this slit with the AMT will not only give her the vision but also the cosmetic correction, and what she wanted your cosmetic contact lens. Now I move into the case 2. This 45 years gentleman came to us in almost after 1 month with chemical injury, and it was by the molten metal injury while he was working, and initially it was managed elsewhere by the medically. When he came to us, we are after the almost 3 to 4 weeks, we have done that. There is almost the eye looks like this. You can see these things is almost the limbal ischemia involving the 2 o'clock up to your 9 o'clock position, and there is a week of the injury. What we have done immediately, we have done a tenonplasty with the AMT, but in spite of the aggressive medication, the progressive scleral ischemia was noted. So our next surgical plan was, and we have seen this having the there is a scleral ischemia was there, and the scleral thinning was there. So we have done for him the scleral patch graft. Now I move on to the case that is the case number 3. That is that this patient is very close to me, because this boy came to us with when he was in the age of 10, and he has an injury of the at the age of 8, and it became almost plastered eye. Can't open the eye, and this is the eye. There is a almost plastered eye. Inferior symblepharon is there. We release the symblepharon. Place the AMT, and the ocular furniture was formed. And an autoslit was done from the other eye with prior consent from the parents. Place it over the AMT, fix its favorite glue, large vessel followed by dorsography. So this is the immediate post-op, and this is the post-op at the 6 weeks. So you can see this cornea is relatively much better clear, and initially he has a vision of 6/60. We have done the patching for the other eye and the down the limb. He has followed up with me for the last 2 years. Now the vision becomes after the I'm giving the amblyopic therapy. It becomes 6/18. This is one of the patient which came with us. This is a young CRPF Jawan who had accidental injury with a chemical injury. After doing the several AMT with the select procedure, the right eye goes like this way, and the left eye it's almost vascularized with the bearing the visual axis. For him, we have done the prostral. So the left eye, which has been already given the prostral, which showing the 6/18 vision. So this is one of the modality of treatment for those compromised eye. So what to choose when the none will work? Then the option is that's the K-Pro. And how to assess when the cornea is opaque? the several things we should be monitored before doing any. Please give me some of the time, please. We have to previous intervention, whether there is not. We have to correct. We have to notice the behavior before any surgical procedure for this patient, and whenever doubt, we have to do the vaping. And the types of K-Pro, if the biocompatible, if the your Boston one, integrated, it is your B2C one, or biological, it is your Mucapi. The component of the K-Pro is nothing but the, if you broadly thinks away as a beginner prospects, it is nothing but the eye will. It has a one optic part and the haptic parts. The optic part, which is made of the PMMA. For the type 1 K-Pro, the haptic part is the corneal carriers and the backlogs. For the type 2 K-Pro, the your optical part is PMMA and the.
Sorry to interrupt, sir, but can you sum it up in next 30 seconds?
I will sum up the things. Can you give me plus 2 minutes, please?
Sure. Yeah.
2 minutes. I will sum up the things. So the choice of K-Pro, this is the type 1 K-Pro when the eye is moist. This is the type of K-Pro, which is when the eye is really dry. We have the through the lid K-Pro and the your Emocap options. So these are the deciding factor. We should be checked. This is the checklist for the ocular, systemic, and others. When the deciding factor for the patient related, whenever we are planning for the K-Pros as a beginner, we should follow this 3 checklist. So why does hype surrounding the K-Pros? Because there's restriction of the lifestyle, multiple factor, and the cosmesis. So these are the follow-up protocol for the type 1 and type 2 K-Pros. So beginners, KMAP, being a ocular surface consultant to a K-Pro surgeon, we should need a proper training. Once we were planning for the individual to start the things, we should have a proper guide or mentor to these the things exactly properly, and we should in a K-Pro setup and long-term commitment or passion for the doing the K-Pros. So what is in K-Pro mean as a beginners? To understand that K-Pro is available options in situation, but the other strategy will not work. Be aware of this option and their indication, broad understanding of the concept, what, when, and how, and appropriate referral, appropriate counseling, and develop special interest and the solid monitoring and the training for before going by your own. So I am presenting this all 4 cases having significant drop of vision following the chemical injury, profound scarring with the LSD, but all have over the model technique as proposed by Sangoman et al. On the IR et al. Classical cases of the unilateral total LSD with a sound other eye and the source of autoslit, pros showing the significant improvement in the visual outcome, and three of all cases showing the promising outcome and the good vision. These are the following journal which showing there is an effect of the ocular surface reconstruction and the K-Pros for the visual evidence all those challenging scenario. So these are the surgical keynotes. Ocular subchemical injury, a true ocular emergency, requiring aggressive intervention. Chemical injury represent 8% to 18% of the ocular trauma, and the patient education about the nature of injury is a must. So my take home message. Management should be in the molecular and the cellular level. Need first stage reconstruction should be discussed in detail. Tenon advancement in the AMT in the hallmark for surgery for the limbal chemical injury. Scleral patch up novel approach to address the post-chemical injury scleral ischemia. Select is an acute management can be tried. Understanding of the K-Pro, which, where, and when inappropriate referral should be managed properly, and dedicated team approach to this patient care in this challenging scenario is always rewarding. Thank you. Thanks for kind patience hearing, and thanks for giving the extra time also.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Sarkar, for finishing it on according to the time. Now we have some questions.
Thank you, Shivani, for forwarding me the questions. I would like to thank all the speakers first for being a part of this IC, and AIOC too for giving us this opportunity. So we have a few questions. So we'll start talk-wise. First one is for Dr. Abhishek, sir. So are you there?
Yeah.
Sir, they want. So we have a question that what is your experience with topical preparations of vitamin A, C, citrate, which are not basically the preparations which are not available in the market?
Yeah. So vitamin C and ascorbate and citrate are available. They are not readily available, but they are available. So you can find out your own couple of sources from where you can procure them when needed. And definitely they do have a better effect in epithelial healing and reducing the inflammation when used as a combination. So I would tend to use them whenever available for all grade 3 to 6 injuries. And they do show a beneficial effect. But if vitamin C injection is not available, you can also go for oral vitamin C. Though it would have less effect if there is total blanching of the limbus. If there is ischemia, the penetration would not be there for the drug. But still, vitamin C in good dose. So the dosage is also important. Many times I've seen prescriptions written as twice a day vitamin C 500 milligrams. So that is not sufficient. You have to give it about in a dose of about 1000 milligram, that to 4 times in a day. So they do have a beneficial effect. Even many studies have shown that. And for retinoic acid, vitamin A, I don't have any personal experience. I would welcome the panelists if they have. But what I have read that there are experimental studies on animals which have shown some beneficial effect, but no personal experience as such.
Thank you so much, Abhishek sir. So we have a next question for Dr. Bhaskar sir. Admin, please mute the other participants.
Yeah. Tell me, Ajay.
Yeah. Sir, we have a question for you. Can dry amniotic membrane available be used in Amsorter? Because many of the people, they do not get fresh amniotic membrane, the private practitioners. So please guide us regarding that.
I don't have any direct personal experience. So all the cases that I have done was using fresh amniotic membrane, but it should be logically possible if you reconstitute the membrane. The only issue is that dry membranes are usually a little brittle, friable, and they tend to tear easily. So the one thing that you should make sure when using the Amsorter is that no area within the ring should have a tear in the amniotic membrane, because then through that area symblepharon will occur.
Thank you so much, sir. Next question we have for Dr. Sumana ma'am. So, ma'am, when do we remove bandage contactless after amniotic membrane and slit surgery? Admin, could you please mute the others? Shivani?
Just 1 minute. 1 minute.
Yeah, I'll take the
Sure,
question
sure.
after that.
Yeah.
Sumana ma'am, just 2
Yeah.
minutes. 2 minutes.
Yeah,
Let
no
them
problem.
mute. Yeah, I think they've muted.
Yes.
Should I repeat, ma'am?
No. I got your point. The actual issue in SLET is the fear to lose the fragments, the special fragments, the valuable fragments. So if actually the duration varies for surgeon to surgeon, but if you ask me personally, I am of the opinion to keep the BCL on for at least 1 month, and I remove it after 1 month, stain it, see how the epithelialization is going on, and after that, if I am satisfied with the outcome and I do not see any loose fragment or anything is there that can be lost and can create a catastrophe, then I actually remove the BCL.
So much, ma'am. First, I'm just taking one question. If time permits, we'll take the others. So next is for Rishi, sir. Sir, you mentioned regarding immunosuppressant use in your cases. Could you please let us know about your regimen, the topical or oral, what you use for SLET cases, allo SLET cases?
Alloslet, yeah. So I actually nowadays I don't use any systemic immunosuppression for alloslet, and that's what I've not had any rejection in any of the patients. What I'm doing is I just use topical tacrolimus. Of course, initially you give topical steroids and lubricants and all that stuff as you would with any other SLET, but I'm giving tacrolimus twice a day, and they seem to be that seems to be helping, and I haven't seen any rejections. Of course, my number is limited, but I think that might be a very good option for these patients who don't have a source of auto source of SLET.
Thank you so much, sir. So there's one question for my session. If not fibrin glue, yeah, as I mentioned, fibrin glue is a great savior in our cases, especially the 360-degree involved one. But even out of fibrin glue, I like to anchor it to the limbus with Vicryl 80 sutures. So that gives me a good night's sleep, and it prevents the chances of a retraction and taking up the patient again on the next day. And along with it, it is, if not BCL, can we do a tarsorrhaphy? Yeah, why not? Even with BCL, I personally don't find any problem with tarsorrhaphy. In fact, it is very good because many of the cases that we get, they have lid notches or lid deformity associated. So that tarsorrhaphy does help us a lot, and especially for the places that who do not have a lot of exposure to amniotic, they can do a tarsorrhaphy and refer to the higher centers. So we have one more question that is for Dr. John Sarkar. What to do in a case of follow-up patient of Kepro? Well, they have not mentioned the type of Kepro. John sir, are you there?
Yeah, I mentioned the Capros. Actually, I was maybe
No.
someone-
They have the question is in what do you give in post-op Kepro patients? Can you just give in tell in
Am I
short? That's
am
the
I
question.
am
Yeah,
I
you're
am
audible.
I audible?
Basically, they want to
So
know about follow-up case. What antibiotic is given?
yeah, actually for the patients whenever you are planning for the Capro, the protocols is that the which Capro you are planning for. I mean, if it is the first gray line is that the eye should be dry or moist. Already explained by my previous speaker was a Rishi Sharif sir. And definitely, if it is your Boston Capros, definitely the protocol will be different. And if it is your the Emocapi, the your medications will be the different. In case
They
of
just
your
want to know the antibiotic given. Antibiotic,
the
in post-op.
yeah, post-op antibiotic is that we are giving the voricona, that is your broad spectrum. You are giving the your amphotericin B voricona, or in the giving the broad spectrum moxifloxacin is given, and the betadine drops in every month. That is a regime for the follow-up those patients, and your lubricating drops is given. And if it is there, you are doing the for the you are talking about the must try, the type 1 Capro, definitely the aging is one of the issues. So you have to give that your aging to also. Whereas in case of your MOKP, there is actually only the broad spectrum of moxifloxacin were given, and the antibiotic ointments and the lubricating drops, and the not the for the your anti-glaucoma medication for the oral. It's preferable in case of your MOKP one.
Thank you so much. Thanks a lot. So I think we are right on time, Shivani.
Yes,
I would like to thank again. Yeah, Shivani, please tell me. Thank you so
yes,
much
Dr.
for being there
Aditi,
with us.
yes, we are right on time. In fact, we are leading. Like we still have 4 minutes to go for the next session.
Thank you so much for sharing
If
all
we
the
have a
questions with
couple of
us.
minutes,
Yeah.
I'd just like to add to what John said. For
Yes, sir,
the
please.
keratoprosthesis, I think one of the good options that we have available to us in India is chloramphenicol.
Yes,
Because essentially you're looking more at a gram-positive infection in many of these patients. So for prophylactic antibiotic, because you have to give lifelong, chloramphenicol is a good option, and periodically you can kind of keep switching it to 4th generation fluoroquinolones and then chloramphenicol. That's what I do. And
Okay.
periodically you have to give a short course of maybe topical voriconazole. That's what I do about once in a month. I give them a week's course of voriconazole.
Exactly, sir. Actually, sir, we are following the still we are seeing our fellowship days. What are the GK Madam's protocols? Actually, they have the for daily basis the gram-positive cover. Whatever we are telling, definitely the cefazolin can be given, or if whenever actually we have to prepare the drops. So there is a chance of contamination of the drops also in those cases. I mean, we have the ready-made source of the moxifloxacin, which has a broad spectrum gram-positive coverage, and definitely that's the once every I mean 4 times in a day every month. Suppose it will be the first 5 days or the last 5 days of the definitely the voriconazole has been given, and top on it we are adding the epidine or the that is a your iodine, that is a topical preparations too also.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I would like to request the panelists to say a few words since we still have time with us. And I would firstly like to thank AIOC and all of you for being a part of this instruction course. And it was a wonderful course at least. I hope the viewers enjoyed it as much as we enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Aditi.
Yeah. Thank you.